Hi, so here we are with Michael Beygelman from Pontoon. Michael, how are you enjoying the conference so far?
I think it's fantastic. This is probably my 7th or 8th year attending. Each year tends to get better. This year I'm really impressed by the amount of thought leadership. It seemed like every session I walked away with something new and something interesting to think about. My team has discussed these things afterwards, so I think, in my opinion, it's probably one of the better conferences I've attended this year, and definitely the best one of these so far.
One of the themes that I'm picking up around what the presenters have been talking is a broadening of the landscape. It's not just about product. It's understanding what HR leaders are thinking about and some of the bigger challenges that they're focused on.
Yeah. So I would agree. The role of the HR organization is changing. If you remember, 30 years ago, it used to be called personnel. That organization no longer exists. And today, HR needs to really help drive business transformation because, frankly, finance people and engineers and business people don't understand the human dynamics. So the role of the chief HR officer is becoming elevated out of necessity because of the economic environment, but also the complexity of society. So we're turning increasingly to HR to help us solve business issues, not just payroll issues or benefits issues.
And what are some of the big macro themes that you think are relevant for workforce planning for the next 5 years and beyond?
I think that in order for workforce planning to be effective, we need to kind of, as an industry, think about the industry verticals in which it can be effective first. So meaning certain industry segments that are highly volatile are probably not good early adopters of workforce planning because they're just too susceptible to the dynamic swings of the economy. So to learn how to do appropriate workforce planning, we need to first target the industries that, let's say, have more stability, and then develop models in those industries that we can then learn from and potentially apply to others. And the trick is that companies need just-in-time labor, and they need it now at the right price, at the right time, with the right skill sets. It's very niche and very focused. So companies need to do a little bit of better job understanding their product cycles and etc. But I think it'll still remain a challenge for some time to come.
So I think it's matching the long-term needs of the business with also a flexible solution that is able to move both ways.
It's true, and when you talk about long-term needs, I think HR people want to talk about long-term needs, but shareholders want to talk about quarterly results. And this is where you get that push-pull. And actually, it is the very reason why CHROs are now also members of the board. Because you're starting to see this trend now where HR officers have a seat at the table. It's to connect shareholder value and expectations with the realities of how a business needs to run. And I think that over time, this is something that's going to help impact the workforce planning piece.
So the view of HR not as a function, but as an essential component of the business, and trying to align the HR strategies and long-term thinking to really understanding the investment priorities and where the business is going needs to be much more aligned.
For sure. I mean, the key is that companies are already, how should I say, siloing transactional activities. It's not that processing payroll is not important, because when you miss one paycheck, 1,000 people know. It goes in the ether and everybody's talking about. So it's an important function, but it's not a function that requires intellect. It's not a function that requires education. It's a function that requires training. And so what's happening is they're moving those into central services models where they could perform that transaction accurately, quickly, cost effectively, and etc. So what's happening is all these transactional elements are moving out of HR. What remains is a strategic element. And this is why there's so much focus on strategy now, because everything else has been moved out. So now the HR suite is being forced in a positive way to step up and help the business.
And with globalization, one of the key themes that came out of the session yesterday was emerging markets. And the talent, that's where the economic growth is. That's where a lot of investment is going from companies. But there is a talent shortage. And how do you mobilize the workforce to get your people to where the opportunities are, which are increasingly offshore and in different markets?
Yeah, and it's actually a brilliant question. I've probably spent the last 6 weeks out of the last 10 in Eastern Europe. I was in Russia, I was in Hungary, I was in Romania, I was in Czech, I was in Poland. So what you're talking about, strikes a chord. The challenge is the skilled workers for a while left those countries to Western Europe to seek employment. So what happened was work was moving east, but workers were moving west.
Right.
And for a while, you had this
So a
problem.
double effect almost.
It's a double effect.
Yeah.
It's a double drain. But now, since Western Europe economy, let's say, is flat to down and there's really no end in sight, what you're now starting to see is a reskilled workforce is now going back to their countries because now they have different levels of business acumen and experience where they could potentially command a premium in local currency.
Yeah.
So as long as it's in local currency, the lifestyle doesn't change because you may need to make less money living in Romania than you do in London. So right now there's a trend because of the lack of work in Western Europe and now an upskilled workforce to where now there's a move to back home, for lack of a better term.
Right. And what are some of the other factors that organizations need to think about in terms of mobilizing their people to get to those opportunities?
Well, organizations, I think the last statistic basically said that less than 36% of the people get a job from internal mobility. And that's not good, because you're constantly going to the market to get new skills. So I think what we need to do is, as really HR professionals, is to do a little bit of like that movie Back to the Future. We need to go back to where we were, where, I'm not saying that 10% of our hires need to be external, but 65% is also the wrong number.
Right.
So we need to kind of go back and look at internal mobility, promotability, and training, because I think if an ROI calculation was actually done, the cost to train, upskill, and move a person is probably significantly less than continuously replacing that person over and over with a new candidate at an inflated rate.
Right. So companies really need to embrace mobility and be thinking about specific things and programs and initiatives to
succession planning, leadership development, internal mobility. It's like we have to get back to the very things that helped us build this great economy.
Right.
And we kind of got away from that when it's just-in-time economy because, frankly, we got away with it.
Right.
And capitalism, it's like nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah.
If you get away with it long enough, you just continue to do it.
Right.
But I think right now we're running into a wall and we're starting to say, okay, we've squeezed the lemon, there's no more juice.
Right.
We have to move on.
We have to look at this.
You have no other option.
Do you feel the financial crisis specifically sort of slowed down some of these things that people were already thinking at and looking at in the boom times, and everyone sort of froze up a little bit? But now, whether we are or we're not coming out of the sort of stagnated growth period, do you think people are now ready to really embrace this more global view, both from a mobility standpoint and also from a contingent workforce standpoint?
I think multinationals, they have to do that to survive. So it's not really a question of if, it's just a when.
Right.
And that's really key. So the quicker they can get to really globalizing their workforce, the better off they are. Frankly, I kind of have a, how should I say, a contrarian view on this point. This is not right or wrong, it's just a point of view. I opened up my 401k statement, it was the biggest number I've seen in 8 years. The stock market is at record levels. Yeah. Productivity is an all-time high. Yeah. So I don't know what people are talking about.
Right.
Because you read the papers, but that doesn't actually align with what's really happening. Right. So the issue is that the multinationals have to embrace it, but frankly, as long as companies continue to deliver profits that their shareholders are happy with, there's really no reason to change. Right. And the CEO comes in and scratches their head going, I don't know what you're talking about. You're solving a problem that doesn't exist.
Right. Right.
So I think that we actually have to see meaningful financial, punitive kind of impact almost to an organization where the C-suite says, white flag, we now have to do something about it, but they're just not seeing it.
And going to your point earlier, there's a lot of focus around short-term returns, and the stock market. Sure, it's right now it's in a pretty good position, but you're thinking about issues and complex issues that 5-10 years out, and in terms of
I think that's what's going to separate okay companies from good companies from great companies, and great companies from excellent companies, because it's Darwinian in nature. This is the law of capitalism. Companies are birthed, they live, they survive, some thrive, some go extinct. Right. And I think you'll see this evolution happen if we just become more acutely aware of it. And you'll see that the good companies are the ones that'll look at this, make the appropriate investments, not for 12 cents extra per share next quarter, but for $2 extra per share 5 years from now. Right. And that's a tough thing to sell, which goes again to why HR needs to be in the boardroom, because you have to explain this to the investment community.
And going to the point around globalization and the need to look outside of your current market. Pontoon, we were talking earlier, you have offices in Australia, Melbourne, where I'm from. Where else? Where is your...
We have legal entities, and we conduct business in 74 countries, basically. We have legal entities there. Adecco, we're wholly owned subsidiary of the Adecco Group, so we have the benefit of having that sort of infrastructure. And that's actually a blessing, because today it would be very difficult to set up new operations in these countries. So we operate there. We have probably, I want to say, 22 to 23 different service hubs throughout the world. We try to nearshore things for voice activity. The whole labor arbitrage thing. I think that unless you're talking massive scale, it doesn't really play that well into recruitment, because it's very difficult, for example, to hire someone for Hungary from the UK, because you have cultural issues, and the same thing from Bulgaria to Poland. It's just so you have to, the practicalities of this, because some of the recruitment has to be decentralized. So Pontoon is basically, the way we're structured in line is to map the market. So if you think about how the global economy is mapped, that's kind of how Pontoon is mapped.
It was an interesting point in the PwC Millennial study that recently came out. The country differences and regional differences on the workforce and recruitment front sometimes trump generational differences, and I think having a presence in these different places allows you to really understand the nuances and the specifics of those cultures.
If you think about, especially when you talk about Eastern Europe, I moved to Eastern Europe and to Asia Pacific, because let's say Western Europe has in general more developed infrastructure, but as you go to Eastern Europe, the infrastructure is less developed. I landed in Runway. I was the only plane to land for 4 hours, and I drove by a prison and a nuclear reactor. And this was my journey from the airport to the town, and the next town is 100 kilometers over. So this concept that in the Western world we live in, where we get in an auto or in a train, it just doesn't exist. So you have to be able to adapt your recruiting strategy to that culture, because people they physically have no way of commuting the 100 kilometers, let alone even if they had the interest in doing it. So it's just not possible. So this is why you get these idiosyncrasies that at the practical level are actually very real.
Michael, in your presentation today, you gave a great example of your website in particular, and how it can scale on any device wherever.
Yep. So we decided to use this technology because as users and as human beings that actually use these devices outside of work, we realize it's very frustrating when you go to a website on a small device and it doesn't come up right. You find yourself swiping and pinching and zooming and tilting and standing in one leg, and it's actually quite comical what we go through as individuals. So we decided to develop a type of technology that allows our, let's say, website, but really any recruitment portal, to scale to the device. In turn, what this actually does is it enables us to quickly launch applications without having to worry about launching them in 8 different dimensions. And every 3 months, there's a new phone with a new screen size, with a new resolution. So, we found that using this type of technology really benefits us from ability to time to market, speed to market, but it's also much more interesting for the users. The user experience is great on a website that really works the first time.
I think a very simple example, if I was going out for dinner last night, this is my first time in Philly, looking up restaurants on my mobile phone. If a restaurant didn't have a good mobile site, it's pretty unlikely that I'm actually going to go there. So that's just a very small example, and you think about it for big companies, and it's kind of crazy that the sort of damage and the brand damage and the spin of candidates and people that can happen unless you really engage with this kind of stuff.
And it's interesting you say that, and not to pick on brands, so I won't, but if you look at some of the largest phone companies, have horrendous mobile recruiting websites. Fact is, they're not even mobile recruiting. They use flash technology, which doesn't render in some of the devices. The websites don't resize. They're designed for a PC screen. And frankly, when you're on the phone is when you're most upset about your carrier. So you'd think that they would want to capture that moment of truth, as I call it, by enabling you to go to their site and go, hey, why don't you come with us? Because, our stuff actually works. But they even at that fundamental level, the adoption has still been slow. So, I encourage people to explore this, to understand it. What does it feel like from the user's perspective? And in the social media world, when someone has a good experience, there's a little button at the bottom of every mobile device with a little arrow. When you click that, you get a box that pops up and it says share with a friend via email, via text, via Twitter, via Facebook, via LinkedIn, and you pass this on. And this creates the public awareness and the good employment branding and these things. You can't have a good employer brand strategy by appointment. You can't show up and go, okay, for the next 2 hours, we're going to come up with a great employer brand strategy. You have to live it. It has to be part of your culture.
So restaurants, recruiters, companies, get a mobile optimized website.
Highly recommended.
Highly recommended. Michael, thanks for dropping in to have a chat with us here at the at the Ritz-Carlton in Philly. It's fantastic to have you, and I really enjoyed your session today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for being here at the event.